Hello everyone, I'm Siddharthan. In this video, let's understand how we can deploy Meta's Llama 2 model on AWS SageMaker using Python. So Meta has launched its next generation of Llama model, which is Llama 3, and the process is same for deploying Llama 3 as well. And the advantage of doing this kind of deployment is that this is completely done in Python. So we use the AWS SDK in Python in order to do this deployment. So this process can be automated. So you can put all this code in a single script and run it, and the deployment will be done. So that is like the good thing about this. So let's get started. So for this, you need a AWS account with proper payment and other details. So if you're working in an organization, so you'll probably have an access to, the AWS account of that particular organization. So you can use that. So for this, as I said, we'll be using Amazon SageMaker in order to deploy our LLM, the large language model, which is Llama 2 in this case, as a SageMaker inference endpoint. So that's what we are going to do. So I have my Jupyter notebook. So here first we need to install the required dependencies. So here I have this requirements.txt file, which has the latest version of the two libraries, Boto 3 and SageMaker. So this Boto 3 is the SDK, software development kit, Python SDK, which helps us to kind of provision and use AWS services from Python. And then we have the SageMaker, which is again, it's used to create the SageMaker clients and access this inference endpoints and so on. So we will be installing these two libraries. So I'll probably give all these files in a repository. You can refer to that. So first you need to install libraries that we have. So the deploy Llama 2 on AWS SageMaker. This is the notebook that I'm in, and requirements.txt is also in the same directory. So I'll just say pip install, so exclamatory mark pip install -r requirements.txt. So this will install the specific version of the libraries that I have mentioned. So as you can see, I've already installed this library. So it says requirement already satisfied. Now let's import the required dependencies. So the libraries that we are going to need is the built-in libraries of Python, OS and JSON. So we are going to use it in order to access the files, and we have this config.json that has the credentials for the AWS account. So we are going to use this JSON library for that. And then we have Boto 3 and SageMaker. So from the SageMaker, we have this Hugging Face module, from where we are kind of importing this get Hugging Face LLM image URA and Hugging Face model. So I'll explain you about all these things. So here we are going to load the model from Hugging Face up. So this process is similar for any Hugging Face model that you want to deploy. So it's not just for Llama 2 or Llama 3. You can again deploy any models that's present on Hugging Face and Hugging Face up. Okay, so that is the next step, which is importing the dependencies. So the next step is you have to configure your AWS account. So for that, you are going to need this config.json file. So where I have some credentials details. So I'll give this config template file to you. So these are all the key value pairs that you need. So first you need a AWS access key, and then you need this AWS secret access key. So you can just kind of use this config.json and replace the key values here. So AWS access key and AWS secret key. So you can get this from your account. So this is one way of connecting to your account from a Python environment. So there are like other ways as well. So we have this AWS CLI command line interface. So by using which you can connect to it, and there are other ways too. So this is like one of the way. And you have this AWS default region, whether it's going to be US East one, which is North Virginia, and then we have this US West and so on. So you can like kind of choose a region of your choice. So here I'm going to use US East one, and we need this role name. So this role that you're going to need for this is SageMaker execution role. So you can get it from your account, and then a HF token. So the Hugging Face token. So Llama 2 and Llama 3 are this gated repository. So if you want to get access to this, you need to accept the terms and conditions for that. So for that, what you can do is go to Google and search Hugging Face. And in this Hugging Face, once you go there, you can go to this search tab and search for Llama 2. So if you're working with Llama 3, you can choose that as well. So once I go to this Meta Llama 2, so 7B chat HF, this is the version that I'm going to use. So this is fine-tuned on chat, the Hugging Face version of the model. So as you can see, this is like a gated model. You have been granted access to this model. So if you're working or if you're looking at this for the first time, so here there will be this terms and conditions thing for which you need to give this accept. And then after like an RR2, they would send you this mail saying that you are granted access to this repository. So after that, you need to go to your profile, And here we have to choose the settings, and in this access token we can copy our the access tokens, and we have to put this in our config.json file. So if you are working with a LLM that is not a gated repository, right, in that case you don't need it, but it's always better to feed this Hugging Face token. So this is how you can get it. So region, again, you can choose any region of your choice on which a particular instance is available. And then role, as I said, so this, if you are using a personal account, right, so in that case you can create the SageMaker execution role. But if you are in an organization, so you probably have to contact the admin to get the necessary permissions. So again, if you're using this personal account, right, so once you log into this AWS console dashboard, so on the right top you have this username, right? So if you click that, there will be an option for this policies, roles, and so on, or IAM thing. So there you can find this policies and roles, and you can create a role there. So the role that you're going to need is SageMaker execution role, and within that you also have this another option called as security credentials. When you click that profile thing, so in that security credentials you can create your AWS access key ID and secret access key ID. Again, if you're working in an organization, you can contact your admin to get like the appropriate keys that you need. Okay, so these are the things that you need in order to get started. And the instance that we are going to deploy this is I mean, it's a GPU machine, so it's ml.g5 X large machine, which is a GPU generation like virtual machines. So we have this G5 X large. So the RAM in this is 16 GB and the GPU RAM is 24 GB. So your Llama 7 billion chat, right? So this is about 15 gigabytes in size, but we will do some quantization. But again, for GPU, this machine is like good, and the pricing is about like $1. When I ran this, the pricing that I got was like 1.58. But if you're just trying the code, you just wanted to deploy this, run some prompts and get a response and delete the endpoint, so you won't be charged like more than $2 or something, like 160 rupees or 150 rupees. So when I was checking this code, I was charged like $0.15, which is pretty less. And again, as I said, if you're working in an organization, you probably have a budget for a month for your team, so you can just use it. But if you're using a personal account, be careful on the resources that you're creating, and and make sure that you're cleaning up all the resources. So in this video, I'll clearly show you how you can clean up the resources that you're creating as well. So that's about the instance that we are going to use. So I'll close this, and yeah, so these are the things that you need. So your access key, your secret access key, region, your role name, and Hugging Face token. Now let's start with the coding work. So I'll close this config.json file. So we have already imported the required libraries. So we have OS, JSON, and we need this JSON library in order to read this config.json file. And then we have Boto 3, SageMaker, and so on. So here, again, you don't actually have to put the credentials, your keys in a config.json file. So you can put this in this code, but that's not recommended at all. So it's never recommended to put your access keys or some secrets in your code directly. So the preferred way is put it in a JSON file and read it in the code, so that you don't have those exact codes or exact keys on your code. And the other way to do that is you can put that in a .env file and load the variables, the keys and other things to your environment variable. So that is like another better approach. So here we are using this config.json file. And here I'm using this json.load open config.json file. So this will read this JSON file, which I have this in this working directory. So this will read this file, and this json.load will convert this JSON object into a Python dictionary. So that is stored in this variable called as config data. So I'll run this, and now I'll run this config underscore data dot keys to show you the keys that we have. So we have this AWS access key ID, AWS secret access key, AWS default region, role name, and HF token, the Hugging Face token. And now we are going to pass on these key values to some variables. So here I'm creating this variable called as AWS access key, secret keys with the same names, and passing all these values. So all this access key IDs and all those are stored in these variables now. And now we have to pass this to the environment variables. So you shouldn't change these names. So this os.environ. So what this will do is it will create an environment variable called as AWS access key ID and store the value of this access key there. Similarly, do this same thing for secret key access and so on. So this name shouldn't change, because when we use this Boto 3 or SageMaker library, it's going to look at the environment variables for this particular key value pass and get the credentials. So you shouldn't change this. You can change change these variable names, but this environment variables names shouldn't be changed. So I'll run this. So the first part is loading this to a dictionary, and the next part is getting all these values for the individual variables, and then passing on these three things to the environment variables. So I'll run this. The next step is we need to pass the role name. So as I said here, this is SageMaker execution role. So what that means is, for this particular role, so let's say that I am the user, which is kind of mentioned here. So this user will have like a set of permission to access set of resources. So SageMaker execution role will have the access to use like the resources that are related to SageMaker. Let's say the SageMaker notebooks, SageMaker inference endpoints, models, and training jobs, and so on. So as we are going to go with this SageMaker for deployment, you need this execution role. So you can create an role kind of with a particular name. So the name that I've used here is Sid YT SageMaker role, but again the naming can be anything, but this is an execution role. So ARN is nothing but this Amazon AWS resource name. So from this you can get this role. So I'm doing this try and accept thing. So it says role is equal to SageMaker.get execution role. But when you run this is going to throw you an error always, because what this means is when you run this code in a SageMaker notebook instance, in that case you can get this execution role because this is running from the SageMaker notebook. So from there it can directly get that execution role. But as we are running it from our local machine, right? So this won't run. So instead we are going to access this IAM, so identity access management. So we are going to access it, give the SageMaker this execution role name and get that particular ARN. So this is again related to getting this permissions and so on. So as I said, you can go to this profile thing, look for your policies and roles, make sure that you have this SageMaker policies and the roles associated to it, and then just pass this over here, and you will have this role, and this role we have to pass it on later while we deploy the model. So that is the next step. So I'll run this. So this is going to give me a error saying that couldn't call git role. So this part couldn't run because, as I said, this will only run in the SageMaker notebook instance. So it goes into this except condition, and now it can pick up this role from this IAM.get role which we have initiated here. So that is the next step. So the next part is we need to configure our instance. So what's the instance that you are going to need, and what's the image, the Docker image that you are going to use, and so on. So here we are creating a variable called as LLM image, and we are using this get Hugging Face LLM image URI. So URI means like unique resource identifier or something like that. So it's just to identify a particular Docker image. So we have imported this get Hugging Face LLM image from this SageMaker.Hugging Face. So we have this get Hugging Face LLM image URI, which basically contains all the dependencies, Python, and all the required libraries that the Llama 2 model is going to need. So we are importing this get Hugging Face LLM image URI and mentioning like Hugging Face version. So this is like a pretty older version, but this works for Llama 2, but you can look for like the latest version as well. So when I run this will get this unique identifier for this particular Hugging Face image, this Docker image. So I'll run this. So this Docker image will be used for the instance that we are going to create. And then this is configuring the instance. So instance type is going to be MLG5XLARGE. So you again, this is like a GPU instance. So this LLMs are like pretty large models, and we need like GPUs in order to load this efficiently and give the response efficiently. We are going with a GPU model. So I'm using this MLG5XLARGE, which has this 24 gigabytes of GPU. And if you're loading this 70 billion, you're going to need like a larger machine like MLG548XLARGE, which has about 192 gigabytes of GPU RAM, which is like pretty huge. So we have this instance type and we have this number of GPUs. So this instance, right, has only one GPU. So we are mentioning that 1 year. So this is basically to tell the configuration thing, like how many GPUs are there and in how many GPUs you want to load your model. So I'll show this other instance to you. MLG5 ML.G5 XLARGE. So if you go to this Vantage Cloud cost, so you have this different version. So we have this 48x large, right? So the RAM is pretty huge, 768 gigabytes, and the GPU RAM is like 192. So here, if you see, you have 8 GPUs. So if you are using this particular instance type, you can mention 8 GPUs. So that means, so the 70 billion model is about 150 gigabytes in size. So it will be loaded into this RAM, but it will be distributed across all the 8 GPUs that you have. So you would mention 8 in that case. But again, for 7 billion chart, so for demonstration purpose, we are just going with a smaller model. But if you want better performance, and if your company is like big enough, and let's say they can afford to have this larger instances, you can go with 70 billion model as well. So here we are choosing the number of GPUs. And then we have the health check timeout. So we are mentioning this as 60. So 60 is nothing but 10 minutes is what we are representing here. So this is what this means is, once the model has been deployed or the instance has been deployed, it waits 10 minutes to kind of, it's like kind of a buffer time to make sure that everything is working, to make sure that the deployment is not failing. So if it's not working till this 10 minutes time, it's going to say that endpoint deployment failed. So this is this health checkup time, and we can mention the endpoint name as anything. So here I'm calling this as llama 2 endpoint. So later when we are going to invoke this endpoint, we will use this name. So that's about this SageMaker config. So we have another like configuration details. So we have this HF model ID, Meta Llama 2 7 billion chat HF. So this is the model ID. You can refer to this model IDs like SageMaker model ID. So you will see this Llama 2 and other version of this model. So let's say you need like 13 billion or 70 billion as well. You can just change these things. And then we have the number of GPUs. So here we are passing this as JSON strings. I've also mentioned in the comment section of what those particular values mean. So you can just refer to this, pretty simple. And then you have this number of GPUs, what's the maximum input length you can allow, so the token length. So you can again play around with these numbers. So maximum token length, so what's the size of the input and output is going to be, max batch token, so it's like how much data you want to process parallel and so on. And Hugging Face token, so the Hugging Face token that we have seen which we are storing in this variable called as HF token that we got from a Hugging Face account. So if you are working with Llama 3 model, you have to go to the Llama 3 model card, accept the terms, conditions and so on, and then again you have to create a access key and then use that. So this is the next step. And then we have this bits and bytes, which is for quantization. So quantization is, we know that this LLMs are pretty large, right? So you can reduce the size of this LLM by quantizing it. It basically reduces the precision of the parameters and the weights. So your model's size is reduced. Again, there is a trade-off with the accuracy of the model, but again, your model size is like drastically reduced, so it is like a good option. So we are using this bits and bytes for configuration, and this is basically a dictionary which we are going to pass later. So these are all the different configuration. Again, you can look up to some of the details if you want. And then here we are creating the Hugging Face model image URI. So this image, LLM image is what we have mentioned, right? This particular Hugging Face image with this version. So we are going to load that. So Hugging Face model, which we have imported here from SageMaker.HuggingFace, we have this Hugging Face model. So I'm going to say Hugging Face model, name of the model is Llama 2 model. Again, this is the model name, you can give anything. So in the SageMaker, right, I'll show you. Once you go to this, you can again search for SageMaker here. So I've already kind of worked on it, so it's showing up in this recently visited, or you can, as I said, search for SageMaker. So here you have this different thing. So you have the SageMaker Studio, notebook instance and so on. So here we are going to create these inference endpoints. And here we will create this endpoint, which is that actual endpoint, and we have this endpoint configuration and models. So the name that you have given here, right, Llama 2 endpoint, so that's the name of the endpoint that it's going to create. And within this model, the model artifacts will be saved, and here we mentioned what's that name is going to be. So here I'm saying that it should be called as Llama 2 model. So here we are mentioning that name. So role, we have already kind of got this role from this IAM get role with this particular role name and so on. And image URI, so what's the Docker image that you want? So LLM image is the one that we got here. And then we have this env. So here we have to pass this configuration dictionary, which we have just now created. So let's run this. And the last step is deploying that. So this is like a pretty simple step, as you can see. So it's not like that complex at all. So we have this LLM model, the one that we have created, dot deploy. we have to pass in the endpoint name that we have created, and the role sorry, the initial instance count, so how many counts you want. So the great thing about this is like SageMaker can be a production ready deployment option. So it also have this option to auto scale. So that means, like, let's say you have deployed this llama 2 model and your application get a lot of requests, and if you want to scale another instance, you can do that with ease without like much worry. So you can kind of have this auto scaling configuration where you can say that, let's say if the GPU is utilized for more than 60 percentage, then create another instance. So it's going to spin up another instance, and you can, I mean, the model will be automatically deployed there. So you can mention all these things, but let's discuss that in a different video. Here I'm just creating like initial instance count to be 1, and instance type is what we have mentioned here, MLG5 large. You can mention other instances as well. And finally we have this container startup health checkup time, which is 10 minutes, as we have mentioned, as 600. Okay, and finally once this is done, we are going to print llama 2 model will be deployed to SageMaker. So this is the last step. Let's run this cell, which is going to deploy our llama 2 model on SageMaker inference endpoint. And depending upon the size of the model, this is going to take some time. For this 7 billion model, it may maybe take around 5 minutes, and for 70 billion, it probably like could take some more time. So again, it depends from model to model. And once this is done, this will print the statement that llama 2 model deployed to SageMaker. Let's again come to this models, and here you can see this has started creating. So you can see the time at which we have created the model, and it says llama 2, and endpoints also it says that it's creating. So this is going to take some time, and you can see the creation time, the name of the endpoint, which is llama 2 endpoint ARN, and so on. So I'll come back here. So we'll see this hyphen. So we'll see like a bunch of hyphens. So this says that the deployment is in progress, and finally when the deployment is done, you will see an exclamatory mark. So that is like the sign for it. So you can check if the endpoint is created in the console as well. So you have to go to this SageMaker, Amazon SageMaker, and go to this endpoints. So you have this, and you have all those endpoint configuration details here. So if you add auto scaling configuration, you can see this within this configuration thing. Okay, so this endpoint deployment is in progress now. I mean, as I said, this is going to take some time. In the meantime, let's also see how we can invoke this model from Python. So I have this another script where we have this option to invoke this. So here I'm again importing this OS, JSON, and Boto3 libraries. And here also we need to configure, in this particular environment, we have to configure the access keys, secret keys, and so on. So we have this config.json, similar process. So we are reading it and storing these key values and region. So it should be the same region that we have mentioned in the previous notebook. So we have this access key, secret key, default region, and we are storing that in the environment variables. And then we have this SageMaker runtime. So this code, once this model has been deployed, this invocation can be done from any machine or any remote places, as we are going to access this from the credentials. It's not like you have deployed this in this machine, you are going to invoke this. So that's not the case. So this will work remotely as well. So we have this access keys and the environment variables, all these are done. And here we are creating a Boto3 client, and specifically a SageMaker runtime Boto3 client. So this is used in order to access an endpoint and just give it a request and get a response from it, just invoking this endpoint. So I'm creating a variable called a SageMaker runtime, Boto3.client, SageMaker runtime, and the prompt. So what's the question or the prompt that you're going to send to your LLM? So here I'm just asking a simple question of what is machine learning, and then we have this payload. So this payload is structured as a dictionary, which will be converted to a JSON later, because this SageMaker client, right? The response that we send should have the payload in the JSON format. So that's why we are doing this, and this is the payload. So first in this inputs, we have the prompt, the question that we are going to ask, and then we have some of the hyperparameters. Again, you can look up the meaning of these hyperparameters to understand it better way. So we have this do samples, and we have this temperature. So for example, temperature is the one. If the temperature value is closer to 0, that means the randomness of the response is less, so you would get more deterministic response. And if the value is closer to 1, you're going to get kind of creative and random response every time you ask the same question. So that's about it. So and finally you have this JSON. We have this payload, and then we are converting this payload dictionary into a JSON using this JSON.dumps, and then we are invoking this endpoint. So we have this SageMaker runtime, right? The client that we have created here, and within this we are calling this invoke endpoint method. And then we are passing the endpoint name that we have created. So we know that the endpoint name is llama to endpoint, and the content type is like what's the data format that you're going to send your input and what's the output you are going to accept. So we are going to send JSON and we are going to accept JSON as well, and body is basically the input data that you are going to send, which is the payload in this case. And finally we can print this response. So again, this would be a JSON object, so you can get this output. This is just like parsing the response. So you do this response body dot read, so this will convert this to a byte object, and later we would convert this to a JSON and to a dictionary using this JSON dot loads response body, and our final response would be in this generated text, and finally we can print it. So I'll show you once this deployment is done. So you cannot invoke this endpoint before the deployment is done, so we can wait till this deployment process is completed. So the deployment is completed, and it completed at 12:44 p.m. and the time that we have started this deployment is 12:38. So this has taken like this much time, about like 6 minutes of time to complete this deployment, and we are seeing this message. Now I'll come to this invoke SageMaker endpoint, the one that we have discussed. Run this part of importing the required libraries and config data and setting up the environment variables. And then I'm calling this SageMaker runtime client, creating this prompt and passing this payload. And we are going to convert this payload dictionary into a JSON object and invoke this endpoint by mentioning the endpoint name and passing this payload. So the response will be stored in this variable called as response, and you can run this in order to print the exact response that you are getting. So let's wait for that. So this would take a few seconds in order to get a response from the model. So let's wait for it. You can also do this percentage time magic command in order to check like how much time that, I mean, this process of getting the response has taken. So that is like a good thing to know as well. So once this is done, we are going to pass this response data and get a result from it. So yeah, so you can see this probably took about 1 minute or some amount of time. So we are seeing this response metadata and so on. So here we are going to parse this by response of body.read and then convert this to JSON.loads, which is basically a dictionary. And then you can print this result. So in this result, which is basically a list, contains a dictionary, and this dictionary contains a key called as generated text, and it has the question of what is machine learning, and then we have this response. So in order to access only this response, you can kind of do this result of 0, which is accessing the first element of this list, which is this dictionary, and from there access the generated text. So here we have the question as well as the answer. So if you want only the answer, so what you can do is use this generated text length of prompt plus 1. So here we are basically slicing the string. So I'm taking the length of this prompt, slicing this response. So what basically happens is you will get a response after this. So finally you would just get the answer, which is this machine learning is a subfield of artificial intelligence, the answer to our question. So you can see it has like stopped in this thing because it probably reached the maximum tokens that we have specified. But this is how you can get a response from it. So first we need to deploy this. Make sure you have this endpoint name and so on. So you can refer to this endpoint name here as well. And finally you can invoke this endpoint using the SageMaker runtime invoke endpoint thing and get a response from here. So this is how you can invoke this endpoint. You can also go to this endpoint configuration and look at the configuration of the model and this models and so on. So the next step is a very important step of cleaning up the resources. So there are like two ways. So one is you can select this endpoint here, go to this action and delete it. This is doing this manually, but you can do this from the code as well. So the next thing is I have this cleanup script, where again you have to do the same step of loading this config data, passing this environment variables and so on. So and then you have this we are creating this boto 3 session and creating a similar SageMaker client and mentioning the endpoint name, which is llama to endpoint, model name, which is llama to model, and endpoint configuration name. So we are going to do this SageMaker. So SageMaker is the SageMaker client, and first delete the endpoint, then delete the model, delete the configuration, and finally print that all these things are deleted. Okay, let's run all these cells. So I'll start from this one. So we are reading the config data, passing the environment variables, creating the client. So now I have this endpoint, right? So when I run this, this is going to get deleted, and this happens like pretty quickly. So mention the endpoint name, model name, and endpoint configuration. So please make sure that you do that, because if you don't do this, you're going to charge like a lot of amount. So the cost that you're going to be charged is like about $1.5 per hour. But if you're just doing this tutorial, it's not going to take more than an hour. So it's probably like you're charged only like $1 or $2 or something. So let's delete this. So first I'm deleting the SageMaker endpoint. So SageMaker.delete endpoint. So it has this response metadata again and so on. So when I come back to this this SageMaker endpoints, when I refresh this, so this should go away. As you can see, we have deleted it, and then we have this models and endpoint configurations, right? So this will still be there. So now we can again come back to this, delete the model, passing the model name, which is llama 2 model, and finally delete the endpoint configuration. So these are the parameters. So you have to first pass the endpoint name for deleting the endpoint, model name for deleting the model, and endpoint configuration name in order to delete this. And this is just a message saying the deleted SageMaker model, llama 2 model, endpoint, llama 2 endpoint, and endpoint configuration. So all these are deleted. So let's come back here. So if you refresh this, you won't see this anymore. So this is how you can clean up the resources that you have created. Again, as I said, you can do this manually, but when you do this in Python, all these steps can be automated. Okay, so this is how you can deploy a llama 2 model, which is again an open source model from Hugging Face on AWS SageMaker. So deploy that, invoke this endpoint, get a response, and this is how you can clean up the resources as well. Okay, so the good thing about this, right? So you can just put all these code in a single script, call this, let's say, deploy llama2.py, and run that script in order to do this deployment. Or you can also have a user interface in Streamlit where the user can just say deploy model in order to do all this deployment in the backend, and invoking endpoint, and cleaning up the resources. So all this can be done in a no code kind of a way where you can just give some Streamlit buttons and user interface where the user can just do that. Okay, so that's it from my side in this video, and I hope that this is helpful to you. So please try this out, and just be careful on the resources that you're creating, and make sure that you are cleaning up all the resources. Okay, so let's see in the next upload. Thanks for watching.